What is radical self-acceptance and how is that different from just plain old self-acceptance? That is a very good question that I am going to answer for you today, in addition to how this can change your life and how we can incorporate this into combating anxiety and intrusive thoughts. So, thank you for joining me today. I am Christy Spirka with Reaching Better Alternatives, and you are here listening to my podcast, Conversations with Christy. Today, I want to talk to you about radical self acceptance and how achieving this has made huge shifts in my life, and how you can use this concept to make those shifts, those same shifts in your life as well. I'm very excited to be here today, and so thank you for joining me. First of all, what is radical self acceptance and how is that different from just plain old self acceptance? That's a very good question. So, when we think about self acceptance, it's, oh, I love myself, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the amazing. But usually, what we really mean is, I love myself and I accept that I have some not so good parts of myself, but I'm just going to leave them over there and say, oops, that doesn't, like, oops, I did it again. Like, and we just keep making the same mistakes over and over and over again. Where radical self acceptance is, we acknowledge those shadow aspects of ourself and we embrace them and we learn from them. So, someone said something to me the other day that really was like, really hit the nail on the head for me. They said, self awareness without self reflection is pointless, essentially. Right. So when I work with my clients using my AAA healing method, I have a three-step process. The triple A's are awareness, acceptance, and acquiesce. And when she said this to me, it became very obvious to me where this idea of self-reflection comes into play with my AAA healing method. We can have the awareness, the self-awareness. I am happy, I laugh. I'm sad, I cry. When my dog poops in the middle of the living room, it makes me unhappy and I yell. That's self awareness, understanding why and how we react in that moment, right? Or even going a step further of, when I was little, I saw someone beat their dog for pooping in the wrong place. And so now I get triggered when I see my dog poop in the wrong place and I go into a panic attack. The That's self-awareness. The self-reflection would be to take that step to acknowledge that trigger and work to heal that trigger so that you're no longer sent into panic attacks when you see your dog pooped in the living room. That's that key aspect of self-reflection. That is that action that needs to take place to heal yourself so that you can m- like heal, grow, and thrive is how I like to describe it, right? Because if you're constantly having panic attacks because your dog poops in the living room, you might eventually just get rid of the dog, or you might start. I don't know, like, just think of any number of things. I didn't come up prepared with a lot of examples. And really, right, this brings me back to the concept of trauma is not our fault, but healing is our responsibility. Right? Like, the fact that you witnessed that terrible act as a child, that's not your fault. But continuing to use that as an excuse for, well, this is how I am and this is the way I'm going to be and that's how it is. There's no self-reflection there. There's no action there. There's no accountability there. There's no willingness to improve as a person. There's no steps taken to heal yourself. So when we can take accountability for, I was traumatized by this event and I now am triggered when this happens. And as a result, I experience anxiety, PTSD, um, intrusive thoughts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, panic attacks. So then the work comes into, well, what do I need to do to heal this trauma response so that One, I don't end up getting rid of my dog. This is a really silly example, and I recognize that. Or two, I figure out how to better train my dog. And in doing so, I develop a close relationship with my dog and I help heal that process from that was created as a result of the traumatic event that you experienced. And then from there, we surrender, we acquiesce. It's my fancy word for surrender, right? And really, what we're surrendering is we're letting go of the toxic behaviors, we're letting go of the negative thought patterns, we are letting go of the identity that we created around this person who is constantly triggered. We surrender to our highest self. There's a duality to this idea of surrender. We let go of the old and the outdated and that which is no longer working for us. And we surrender to our higher self. We step into that higher vibration, that vibration of love and fulfillment and purpose and pursuing your passion in life and feeling really good about what it is you're doing in this world in this lifetime. Right. So that's my AAA healing method is acknowledge growing awareness around, okay, this is why I act the way I do, accepting it for what it is, the good, the bad, the ugly, the amazing, taking the steps to heal that, figuring out, well, maybe, what and this is there's a concept called shadow work, which I'll talk a little bit more in a bit. But understanding that like the shadow is just as much of our personality as the higher energies of our personality. That's nothing to be ashamed of. When we can embrace those shadow aspects, we can turn those negative traits or those liabilities into bigger and deeper strengths. And then we can move into acquiescence. We surrender the bad habits when we thoroughly accept everything about ourselves, that radical self acceptance. We can let go of the old identities. We can shift our behaviors and we can step into alignment with our highest self. Empowered alignment is what I like to call that. So this is a process that I have developed over the years from working with clients, just as a massage therapist and with energy healing, and now as a coach, taking that time to do that deeper exploration and on a personal level as well. I I had my own period of shadow work. I mean, let's face it, the healing journey is a lifelong journey. There's always layers to an onion, and depending on your beliefs, those layers can go back to past lives, even, right? Um, and they can even trauma, we can absorb trauma when we're in the womb in our mother's belly from the events that our mother is experiencing. So as we move through life and we are surrounded by from the moment we are born to the moment we become adults, whatever point that exists for you, we are surrounded by other people and events that are out of our control to a certain extent. Actually, probably majority of the time, right? And so when we become an adult, we step into this world as this what was once a beautiful being that's slightly tattered. But that's okay. That's that radical self acceptance. Everything that you've gone through up until this point has brought you here, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the amazing. And usually you just hear the phrase the good, the bad, the ugly. I like to add in the amazing, right? Because it's a scale. And why should we only just focus on the bad aspects when we can? It's not just good, it can also be amazing. Right? It's again, it's let's equalize that duality. And so throughout various points of my life, I experienced suicidal ideation. I experienced intrusive thoughts, specifically around transgender OCD, which will be another episode all itself. Um, and I was really in like this dark place. I had two babies. I was going through postpartum depression. And my world had been turned upside down from my mother passing away and COVID happening and losing my main source of income as a massage therapist and just trying to figure out what the hell I was doing with myself. I had gone from this free loving hippie to being a mom with a partner and a house and a chronically ill dog. My dog, my pit bull Sophie, suffers from an autoimmune disease. Can't think of it right now. I'll think of it later. And so I had all of a sudden gone from just worrying about me to having four other individuals that really depended on me. And so it became really stressful. And so I went through really dark periods of shadow work. And I think that's where the intrusive thoughts really started to come in play as well. Right. When you go through a shift your identity, everything that you were wants to hold on to you more deeply, and you kind of have to work to break through that. And this can happen whether or not you're healing yourself from chronic illness, from chronic pain, if you're just having a lifestyle change, if you want to go through a mindset change, a career change, um, life circumstances affecting you, right? As we step into different phases of our life, we go through identity shifts and changes. And depending on how radical that identity shift can be, can determine like how deeply those old identities want to keep us in place. Especially if you think of someone going through addiction and trying to heal themselves of addiction, that's a huge identity shift to go from that person who needs substance to exist in this life, to feel good in this life, to being a person who can go with the ups and downs and learn how to feel good and also feel bad and not need substance, not need to rely on substance to make those to sustain those changes, right? There's a lot of identity shift that has to happen. And so those intrusive thoughts will come in to try to keep you in place. And there's a couple different reasons for this. One, our brain wants to keep us safe. And the safest way to keep us safe, the easiest way to keep us safe, is to keep us in that same identity. Change takes energy, and the more energy we need, the harder it is to survive. So, our brain wants us to conserve energy. So, it wants to keep us safe and in the same place so that we're more able to survive. There's a lot of caveats around that. Um, but really, we have to be able to shift that identity in a way that feels safe, that our brain can accept those changes so we can heal ourselves from the intrusive thoughts that want to keep us small, so that it feels safe to grow and expand and shift your identity. Because, and from that process, it feels normal to use that energy, and it's no longer a fight or flight mechanism that our brain will instill in us, right? It just becomes part of the status quo that we're working to grow and expand ourselves. That when we enter that stage of growth as the new normal, it no longer is such a fight to grow. And also, new level, new devil thing, as we work to grow, things from our past will come up, right? These are the layers. We have to work to heal the layers that want to keep us down. So it's it's a multi-pronged process of healing. But when we can work into that radical self-acceptance as the new level, new devils start to come up, we can recognize this in a way where we can embrace those devils and we can really examine them and heal them and shift them. And becomes really, really powerful, right? Part of this process that I use to do this is what I call witness and release. Witness is what's coming up, examine it, play with it, and release it instead of sitting in it, right? And so this is how this radical self acceptance becomes the basis for moving through life in a way where you can feel more at peace, more at ease, more in flow with things, because you're not fighting what's coming up. You're recognizing it's part of the process, and you can move through that process with some new tools to get you there. Right. And so this is a lot of times people will call this the shadow work, being able to acknowledge those lower vibration aspects of yourself, being capable of sitting with those lower vibration aspects of ourself, sitting in them, feeling them, working what's coming up as a result of that, examining it, getting to the bottom of that. educating ourselves to understand, the physiological responses as a result of trauma, understanding the correlation between physiological responses and our emotional responses, figuring out how our brain computes that and how we make meaning of that in that moment so that we can heal it and shift the identity and raise our vibration. We can surrender into our higher self as we let go of those outdated ways of thinking and being. So, this is radical self acceptance. Traditionally, it's like, oh, I hear often, I'm so fat because I can't stop eating donuts. I just learned to accept about myself that I'm just going to always have a big ass because I love donuts. That's not radical self acceptance. That's just, whoop. We're just letting things happen to us without taking any accountability for it and not doing anything to change it. Not to say that nobody should eat donuts, or that you shouldn't accept that you have a big ass, right? Like, everybody's shape and size is different, and that realm of different shaped bodies is what makes people beautiful. But maybe that's the shift that you need to understand. It's not about the donuts, it's about that's your shape. And maybe those donuts could be replaced with something else. Maybe the radical self acceptance is you eat those donuts to give yourself a dopamine hit because as a child, you were never given the full acknowledgement that you deserve love because you have a big ass, right? So you start to dive into how we create these correlations and this identity around it so that you can truly love your big ass and love the donuts. And then also, you no longer need to eat those donuts to feel good. They truly become a treat, right? There was this one class I took a couple years ago where when we constantly use sugar to reward ourselves, we will create an identity around that. And so when we're feeling bad, we'll treat ourselves um, without actually healing that underlying issue. So if we can dig into that underlying issue and heal that, the donut then really becomes just a treat when it makes sense and not a treat to make ourselves feel better because we need a dopamine hit. We're able to create dopamine hits in other ways from developing better relationships first with ourselves and then those around us, for instance, right? Because we can't truly love someone unless we can really love ourselves. We can't truly accept love from another unless we truly love ourselves. Otherwise, you can step into habits of trauma bonding and looking for that love and affection that you never received as a child from your parent, and you focus on receiving that from your partner instead of being able to just feel fully confident in yourself. I see this play out over and over and over. I myself have been guilty of this. I see this everywhere all the time. And I probably still do this at some extent. And chances are, if you're listening to this, you might, you may or may not be aware that you do this, but you might need to hear this to start bringing a deeper awareness around why this is happening for you. And again, it's not about shame or guilt. If you can step into that radical self acceptance, you can see where it comes from. You can understand it. I like to say that which we ignore controls us, right? If you can really understand and embrace everything that has brought you to this moment and that experience that you needed, that lesson that you needed to learn, to be able to move on to the next phase of your life. But if you don't truly embrace all of that, you'll never truly move forward and you'll be stuck constantly in this battle of anxiety and intrusive thoughts and wondering why you can never get ahead and feeling like a victim of life. But when we can step into radical self acceptance, we can see that it's just a cycle and our body is fighting the change. And when we can understand what that change can look like and how to support our nervous system to allow this change to happen, and we can create, um, learn tools to get us through these moments that want to hold us back so that we can work through them and rise above and acquiesce to our higher self, right? And understand that our whole life, we have our whole life to work through this, being gentle with ourselves, taking true accountability while also being gentle with ourselves. Again, the accountability is not a form of victim blaming, like, oh, I shouldn't have been walking down that street that night. The accountability is, okay, I've now suffered this trauma. I now have PTSD. How can I heal this PTSD? Okay, maybe this therapy is not the right time and place. Now I know it exists. Let me go find something that's going to work for me in this moment. My first episode, I talked about how, different things affect different people at different times and how different healing modalities will be appropriate at different times. True accountability is knowing you have to do something, knowing when it's appropriate to do something and when it's not appropriate to do something. Right. And then also taking responsibility for your reactions to the world around you as a result of the trauma that you've endured so that you can really examine those responses and stop throwing your shit at the wall everywhere on everyone and bring it back to yourself so you can go deep within and heal that trauma that was not your fault. But truly taking responsibility for yourself and the effects of that trauma on you will be the most healing thing you can do for yourself. Again, the trauma was not your fault, but healing is your responsibility. And understanding what that can look like can be so empowering. But these levels of awareness take time to shift into, and being able to recognize at what place you're at without shame or guilt, and just being able to be in that moment and heal it and work through it, and so you can prepare for the next level is also a part of the process. And from that place, you gain confidence, you gain self love, you gain the ability to detach from other people's bullshit around you, knowing that that's because of them and not because of you. You can move through life. Anxiety will creep in, but it won't overtake you. Intrusive thoughts will creep in, but they won't overtake you. You'll be able to witness them and release them. And that is like such a beautiful, powerful thing. But it takes time. It takes patience. It takes support. It takes energy. It takes radical self acceptance. The good, the bad, the ugly, and the amazing. And from that place, you can step into who and what you are meant to be in this life, and you can fulfill your purpose, and you can bring so much meaning and love to the lives of the people around you because you first learn to love yourself. And so, my greatest wish for you is that you hear my words and something shifts something in your brain, and you take one more step onto that path of radical self-acceptance, and you start understanding what accountability truly means, and you begin that process of healing yourself, mind, body, and soul. And if you feel like this is something that you need support with, this is the work that I do. Please feel free to reach out to me. You can find all my information in the show notes below. If this resonated with you, please like my video, subscribe, and receive notifications. And if you really would like more information, you can email me at reachingbetteralternatives@gmail.com. I look forward to hearing from you, and I can't wait to see you on my next episode of Conversations with Christy. Namaste, my friends.